So I've set up here to show the process of proportional measurement, and I will share a shot, which I'm actually going to take right now, that will roughly show the view that I have of these things that I'm looking at. In proportional measurement, we look at how tall something looks and compare it to how wide it looks. We're measuring the two-dimensional aspect of a form. We're kind of looking at the form's shape, and we're going to create this sense of volume through tricks of illusion, and the main trick is overlap. We're going to start with overlap. So I'm looking at there's a red pepper on the table, and I'm looking at the overall height of the red pepper. When I measure, I close one eye, and I close my left eye. I guess naturally I close my left eye. Yep. My right eye is my stronger eye, I think. And when I look at the red pepper, I visually line up the top of the pencil so it lines up with the top of the pepper, and then I move simultaneously. I hold that pencil in place so it's at the top of the high point of the red pepper, and then I simultaneously move my thumb down until I'm marking the bottom of the red pepper. And I've measured the height. That tells me absolutely nothing. I have to compare one distance to another to use proportional measurement. So I have the height of the pepper out here on my pencil, and when I compare it to the width of the pepper, I can see that the height is greater than the width, and I'm going to explain this, but I'm actually going to change process. I'm going to measure the width first, and I'm going to compare the width to the height. And so the width goes up to the back side of the crown, which is the ring that runs around the stem. So when we're using proportional measurement, we are going to start by drawing in boxes. So I'm going to put and I'll explain what that means as this progresses. So I'm putting a line here. This is going to be the right side of the pepper. I'm putting another line here, and that's going to be the left side of the pepper. I'm not extending these lines up and down yet, but I'll need to do that in a minute. That's the width of my pepper. Now I've decided how big to make that on the paper. I've just chosen how big I want that to be. I'm not determining. That's not related at all to the distance I've measured when I measure the distance here. I'm not measuring a distance and then trying to double it or triple that. You shouldn't do that, actually. I'm just measuring the distance. I'm comparing one distance to another. Remember, always compare one distance to another distance. Okay, so the height, there's a component of the height that was equal to the width. And this is why it's good to have two pencils, because you're kind of use one as a ruler in a sense here. So I'm marking out the total length of the width, and I'm marking this edge with my thumb here. I'm going to rotate that, and that's going to become the height. And so I'm putting a mark at the bottom, and I'm putting a mark at the top. So I've basically taken that distance, and I've just flipped it until it's vertical. So I'm going to mark this out. This is a point not in the middle of the pepper, but not on the top edge. And this is the bottom edge of the pepper. I don't have to worry too much. Notice I'm not using a ruler or anything to draw these lines, and I'm doing multiple passes as I draw the lines. And I'm using a drawing technique. I'm using a searching line. I'm not trying to make this line like a perfect, clean line. I'm not worried about that. It might be a little crooked. Okay. So there's a space up above the top of the, and I just have to see how big that is. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the height of the pepper is just a little bit greater than the width. And if a lot of this drawing is going to be kind of guessing and then checking. So I would say this is kind of my educated guess is that the top of the pepper is here. Okay, so here's my pepper. Okay, it doesn't look like a pepper yet, but it's just a bounding box. It just shows the relative width to height relationship of the pepper. Now I have to try to get more specific about what I'm actually seeing up there in the pepper. And I can start with looking at the edges. The edge on the right hand side actually bends in a little bit. And of course it's going to curve in. So I'm doing a rough shape for the pepper right now. The high point on the pepper is over on the left. I'm trying to stay in my bounding box. So if I want this to be higher over here on the left, then I need to be a little bit lower over here. And then a little bit lower over here. This is all should be always open for adjustment. So don't worry if something is not, I'm not worrying if something's not in the right place, and neither should you. And we want to get it to what we feel is the right place, but we're starting. Okay, the widest point of the pepper is probably about here. So this comes out, hits here, and then this is gonna, hits the edge there, and then this is gonna come in. Okay, now the pepper is kind of has some big overlaps in it. So I'm looking at the big shapes in the pepper. There's a big shape in the front that's overlapping a section that's off to the left. So I'm trying to roughly indicate where that is. Now I have to be careful, this curve is actually going up too high here. This curve has to come down to there. Okay, so these are the big shapes in front for the pepper, and this line right here, you'll see it in the picture that I show of the pepper. But no, I'm not drawing from the picture, I'm just showing you the picture so you can see what I'm referring to. So I have this big shape here, it's overlapping this thin shape here. This thin shape is coming down and going behind, and we know it's going behind because of the way these two lines meet up. This line comes in and truncates or ends here, and this continues, this goes behind. The same thing happens over here. This edge comes down. I want this to be in front of that, and I'm using the line to make that happen. Okay, now the pepper has a stem. It's a fake stem, it's plastic pepper. It has a stem, and then it has a crown around the top, or this ring around the stem that's coming down. And then there's overlaps happening, subtle overlaps happening in all the sections of the pepper coming around. So I need to try to indicate those a little bit more. And I want to make sure I'm putting the crown in the front edge of the crown. I'm estimating is here. So I may have to change my shapes a little bit. But I'm going to measure the distance. I'm going to measure the size from the top edge of the pepper down to the crown, the near edge of the crown, the ring around the stem. I'm going to measure how big that is, and then I'm going to see how many times that distance goes from the bottom of the crown down to the bottom of the pepper. Once I figure out that relationship, I can very accurately decide where to put that edge. Okay, so I'm measuring the height there. And again, I'm measuring this distance up here. And then I'm going to count down how many times does it fit in the front section. 1, 2, a little bit less than 3. So it's 2 plus, almost 3. So 1, when I do this I can use my pencil to mark out my measurements. 2, now that's exactly 3 there, so that actually is too small. So this has to come down a little bit. Now I haven't brought it down very far, but you'll see that that'll make a drastic change. So there's 1, 2, 3. So now 3 is going way below. Before it lined up there. So it's about there. It may have to go up a little bit actually between the two. About right there. It's going to make me change some of my curves. So I'm going to roughly sketch in where I want the crown to be, or where I think it should be. You're always drawing where you think you want something to be, and then you are making adjustments as you examine your work, or you get feedback on your work. Now when I look at the stem, I've drawn through because the stem is going to be in this area. When I look at the stem, the top of the stem comes very close to hitting the top of this middle curve that's here. Alright, I'm not drawing that curve exactly right yet, but okay, so the top of the stem comes very close to hitting this. This is going to be the high curve that's on the left. And if you can see here, I'm moving. I originally had this edge here. I'm drawing with a searching line. I'm trying to get a little bit more specific. I have to be willing to always move things around. I'm seeing that curve a little bit more clearly now. Now the stem is in this neighborhood right here. Okay, I'm changing the position that I originally drawn. I might change it again. I might change it back. Yeah, actually this is... So this process of looking, responding, adjusting, refining, I always find that I need to have something in place on the paper. You know, obviously you have to start with the paper is blank as you start, and then I can really look carefully and see if what I have is working or not, and then adjust from there. Okay, remember that overlaps are one of the most important tools for making space, and so I'm seeing some subtle overlaps in here. I'm trying to pull them out. Okay, now there's something I don't like about this. This seems too big. The top of this is not set up exactly right. But again, I'm just starting, trying to put in the big overlaps, and there's an overlap that's going to happen here. I have to break this edge, and I'll show you a picture again just as a reference. This edge is coming down, but there's a section of the pepper in front of it, and this section of the pepper has to come in front of this, has to be a clear overlap, just like we have here, and just like there's going to be down here as well. So this edge is going to have to, something about this edge is going to have to change, because I want this to come out in front and make an overlap. So I don't want those two edges to line up. Exactly, this edge is going to have to make this overlap over here, something like that. Yeah, there's something completely wrong about this that I'm going to have to figure out. Now, I can look at how wide this distance is from here to here. This is the crown of the stem, and I can compare how wide that is to this and how wide that is to this here. And that will help me figure out what's going on with that. Okay, so just before I was concerned about the width of this compared to here and compared to here. And what I've done is I'm lining up the tip of my pencil with the edge of the cap like this, visually out here in space, and I'm lining my thumb up with the left edge of the pepper. So I'm seeing how big that is, and then I'm sliding that distance over, and I'm seeing that the space across the cap, this shape here, or the crown, I'm seeing that is about equal to this distance, and the space over here from the edge of the crown out is a little bit smaller than these two. I'm going to double check that. So I'm measuring that first on the left. Then the space in the middle, actually if I double check, yeah, it's almost exactly the same size. And then off to the right, it's a little bit smaller. It's maybe about 2/3. So I was concerned about this being too big before, but those measurements are lining up pretty well. This could be a little bit smaller, so I could potentially slide both of these over just a little bit, making this a little bit bigger and making this a little bit bigger and a little bit smaller. It's very close. Now I've been away since the previous recording was made, and that can help me sort of taking a break, stepping back and taking a break can be a good when you're working on anything. You hopefully see it with some fresh eyes. And I am just trying to look anew at what's happening here. One of the things I've said before is that overlaps are incredibly important when you're drawing. They're one of the key ways you're going to make space in a drawing. You may use it in an animation, anything. You might use it in design. You'll use it in photography, maybe a little bit absent-mindedly, but it'll be happening too. So I'm just looking at the overlaps that are happening, trying to pull things out. There is an overlap that's happening from here to here, and this section of the pepper, it's overlapped by this section here. So this section is overlapping this is overlapping that. It's very subtle how this edge comes down and passes behind this edge. And sometimes when you see something that is subtle, you sometimes have to, you can exaggerate that change to make it clear and sort of legible. So it's easy to read when someone's looking at your work. You have to exaggerate things to make sure that people read it the way you want them to read it. Now, one of the things that's happening here is when I look at this curve for this section of the peffer, to get the curve right, I need to get the high point and put it in the right spot. So when you're drawing something, you're going to sometimes use a horizontal line of sight. So I'm lining up a horizontal line at the top of that, at the high point on that curve, to trying to see where the high point is. And what I'm seeing is that the high point is actually here, and then the curve has to drop off. And in my drawing previously, the high point is there. I need to shift it, the high point, over. So this is going to fall. So this curve is going to change. And then you can also use a vertical line. So I'm lining up a vertical line to me and attaching that, and I'm seeing that this curve here almost comes out as far as this curve. So it's almost like this. So that edge is going to change a little bit, and I think that's more accurate to what's happening over there. So I'm moving this down a little bit. This edge is moving over. I'm using a pretty, I'm getting a little less searching here with my line. It's getting a little bit more defined. As I look here, I remember this overlap from before, very subtle. And then this one here. So this was coming up, and this was going to join with that. So this is going to have to go out. Okay, and here I do want to maintain the overlap. I want this to come in front and push that back, so I'm careful about how those two lines meet. Okay, so I have that in front. Now I have to be a little bit careful. I'm using a pretty hard edge now, pretty heavy edge, pretty heavy line, and you want to be careful about going too heavy all the time. You want your line to have some life to it and some variation. And also there's a thing called line weight in drawing. And line weight makes space. So if the lines, and it's a variation in line that makes space. So if I keep all these lines exactly the same weight, I make everything dark, I'm not going to have much variation. That's not always a problem, but in this case, as we're thinking we want to make something as volumetric as we can, we want to use a darker line where it's a little bit closer, and a lighter line, it's somewhat of a lighter line where it's further back. Now, one thing I had done is I had brought this edge down a little bit here. And the top of this doesn't overlap with this edge here. So this is up a little high. So this can't touch, those edges can't touch. Has to be a little space between them. So I'm moving the edges around a little bit. Now here, I'm going to make an overlap. I'm going to have this in front of this. So this shape here is overlapping this shape. This is pushing this back. Right now, I'm not showing an overlap I have to either pull this edge down here or pull this edge down here. I can suggest an overlap by just doing that, a strong change of direction. But what's happening is that this edge is coming down, something like that. In there. So that is getting pushed back the most, that section. And you'll notice it's also the smallest out of all the sections too. It's getting pushed the furthest back, and it's the smallest as well. Now, on these sections, this is a big section, but I can see a small area where it's almost breaking in two. And that's why I'm starting this line going up. I'm not going to carry this line all the way around. You can see it's going to be a lighter line, different line weight. This is a big section in the front here. And I can see, well, I've drawn with a Sharpie, I've drawn an edge on this. This is a very subtle line that comes down and then goes in and underneath. So I'm gonna sort of have that there, and I could, as I'm looking, I can see that the left side of this section here is overlapping those shapes of the crown. Now, one thing I said before is you can hold up a vertical line to look at an edge to see what the edge is doing. This edge, I'm holding up the vertical line to this edge, and it's almost lining up exactly with that vertical line. I want it to slightly come in so it's not quite vertical. And there, if my pencil represents the vertical line, you can see this edge now, I'll have to do a little refinement, is coming down. Now as I look further, I can see that this curve is a little bit more rounded here, so I'm pushing the edge over to get more of a rounded, not so much a rounded corner, but more of a curve. A rounded corner is a curve too, but more of a steady curve, I guess. I'm just trying to put more volume. That might be too much, actually, that curve right there and there. But I'm trying to put more just volume into that. Now, I don't have much information in this area of the stem. I know it's I know that it's a cone. It's a truncated cone shape, so it's wider at the base, and it's a little bit narrow, not a lot narrow at the top. And I know it's, it's a cone, it's round. And so how do I want some kind of information there. At the base, I kind of have this clue that it's round here, even though some of it's covered. How do we show that at the top? Now there is kind of, you can almost see something coming forward here. And there's a little There's almost where you can see something going down and then something going over like that. And that would be one way with these interior lines that you could show these sort of changes in direction. That's what this little line is here. That's what this little line is here. And there's the slightest of that happening here as well. So I've got an okay pepper going on there. It's just a single object, and the next step, or one of the next steps, would be how do you draw multiple forms together? And we're going to start with a different setup for that. So this is going to be the end of this first video. We have a contour line drawing, emphasizing overlap, using proportional measurement to set things up. I still have the original envelope or bounding box here in place. There is some, there's some additional work I could do on the curves, but I think it's pretty good. It's pretty good with what we have here for now. Getting comfortable with proportional measurement is really crucial because it's going to help you get through drawing problems when you're not sure how big something is. Oftentimes we will look at something and think we know what we're seeing, but you have to, in drawing, you learn to slow down and examine the form in an objective way, or examine the shape in an objective way as you learn how to draw that.